welcome to the channel. I'm Dan Lee and I'm currently building a quarter scale version of our new boat design called Temptress, and that is what you just watched me take into pieces. So we've done a complete dry fit and we put everything onto the strongback system, got everything set up and done a preliminary install of everything, pretty much so that we can just get all of those components built and then we know that we have everything ready to go on the boat. So what we're doing in this stage now is we're stripping all that back down. As you can see, I've got all of those components in front of me here, and we are going to do the process of epoxy coating all of these parts before we finally install them in place and glue everything together. So why are we doing that? Well, Temptress is a modern wooden boat construction. It utilizes the latest advancements in wooden boat construction and very much follows the practices that are taught in the very good book by the Goujon brothers on modern wooden boat construction. So part of that process, what we want to do is create dimensional stability within the timber. We want to make sure that everything is completely sealed against water ingress, and that's going to deliver a boat at the end of the build process that is very minimal maintenance, that is going to be very much akin to what you would expect to see from a fiberglass boat. So we don't want to be seeing any kind of expansion and contraction of timbers. We don't want to be seeing swelling of planks. This is definitely not a boat that is going to need to swell up in order to remain watertight. This is a complete modern wood composite construction boat. The whole hull is going to be cold molded. Any timber that is within the construction of the boat over a certain dimension is laminated. So dimensional stability is really at the core of everything that is designed into the process of building this boat. There are a number of ways that we do that, and one of those ways is that we laminate timbers. So anytime that a large scale timber has to be created, it's built up out of many small timbers, and we've seen that in previous videos before where we've done some laminations. Another key element to that is going to be epoxy coating, and that is what we're doing in this video. So what we want to do with this boat, every single piece of timber within this boat is going to be completely encapsulated with epoxy before we finish it, and that is regardless of whether that finish is going to be bright finished, so a varnish finish, or whether it's going to be painted afterwards. There are a number of reasons for doing this. The biggest reason really is down to creating protection for that wood. So what we want to do is create a complete barrier that's not going to let any water ingress into the wood, and by doing that we also improve our dimensional stability. So we're going to seal that wood in. We're going to prevent any fluctuations in moisture content level by the water. We're going to prevent any fluctuations in moisture content levels by the wood taking on or losing water, and therefore changing its moisture content, which is also going to contribute to the physical moving of the timber. So we are aiming to completely encapsulate every piece on this boat. Now, the reason for doing that at this stage is that we can do that really thoroughly without having to worry about trying to work inside the boat and get into every little tiny nook and cranny. So we can do it at this stage, we can be really thorough. This is going to be the kind of preliminary epoxy sealing stage, so a lot of these parts, they're still going to have exposed edges where we've still got work to do on them, but what we're going to aim to do here is to coat most of the parts of it that we won't be able to easily access when we do this finally within the boat. So some of you may have seen a video that I recently did where I varnished an engine hatch, and I used epoxy to seal the surface before I applied the clear in that process. That's kind of led on to a little bit of debate, and there's a little bit of confusion around the subject, I feel. So what I'm actually doing right now is I'm working on a dedicated video that is going to completely talk about epoxy encapsulation of wood. It's quite a broad subject. There's a lot of things to consider with it, when it might be suitable for you, when it might not be suitable for you. So many factors that really need to go into play before there's a straight kind of yes or no answer as to whether or not that process is suitable for your application. So in this video we're going to kind of gloss over, excuse the pun, some of that kind of stuff like we've just done, and I'm going to show you really how that process applies to this boat in particular. And the epoxy video is going to be coming out soon. It's quite an involved video. I'm currently scripting everything out for it, and I'm working actually with Wessex Resins, who are the kind of gods of epoxy here in the UK, so they're going to help me to get all my facts right and make sure that everything I say is correct. So I'm telling you guys the right things, which is very important. And we're also going to get some really cool footage. I'm going to go to their facility and we're going to film some stuff over there. So keep a lookout for that video. It's coming down the line, but it's taken me quite a lot to work on it, so we'll get to that in a bit. Right now, let's get coating some parts for Temptress. Okay, so I'm going to dot through a handful of things. I'm not going to show you coating everything because it's much the same as the frame building process. Once I've shown you one frame, they're pretty much all the same as that. So we're just going to cherry pick a few of those and take a look at what needs to be done. So we've got frame one here. We've got our bulkhead, which is separate from our main frame component. We want to keep those separate for now. And those will get paired up when we put all of this stuff back in the boat and we do a final glue up. So there's a couple of things we want to do here. Just generally clean up, I've got a little bit of glue on here from when I glued up the keel and the chines. So we just want to be cleaning up things like that. So the finish that we're actually going to use on the inside of Temptress will be a varnished finish. We could go for like a satin varnish just to kind of dull things down a little bit. But the epoxy clear coat is going to form the base of that phase. So what you need to remember if you're coating anything within the boat at this stage, once you've coated it, that's how that part is going to look when it is within the boat. So if you've got things like numbering systems written on the parts, now is kind of the time where you might want to remove those if you don't want them to be seen within the boat, or reposition them somewhere else. Do things like fill in these little frame construction holes. We can do that as well, and just generally cleaning up any glue parts. If I was building one of these, I would definitely do this in a clear finish because it's going to look absolutely stunning on the inside. If you guys follow some companies like Van Dam Custom Boats, you'll see some of the work that they do, and massively inspiring to me. Their work is just the top end of things, and you see the way that they finish some of the inside of their boats and they just look incredible. So that's the kind of thing we want to be aiming for here, really sort of striking inside to the boat as well as the outside. I think it all kind of plays a part really, and the inside of the boat should definitely not be overlooked. So that's what we want to aim for with this, even though this is a tiny model. But I'm doing it in the way that I would do a full-size boat. Okay, so this is roughly what we're looking to achieve here with each individual frame. So I've got everything cleaned up, all the faces and stuff are nice and how I want them to look basically in the finished boat. And then we just want to slightly denib all of these corners, so we're just rounding these off, and that's just going to help us to get a good epoxy coating and a seal all the way around that part without the risk of breaking through any corners when we're sanding, and then creating ingress points to those parts. So the focus really is on the kind of inside of the frame here, and that's what we're going to be coating. Now bear in mind that we've still got work to do on this frame. So we've got topside battens to set into the outsides of the frame. We've got things to bevel when we set the chines in and stuff like that. So there's still going to be work to do on the outer perimeters of this. So our sort of focus for the epoxy coating stage at the moment is really just on internal sections. So we'll do each face of the frames, and certainly focus on any areas that we may not be able to get good access to once the boat is together. We've also got the bulkhead, so there's edges to consider where there's going to be where you're going to see things. So like this clearance hole through here, we just want a nice rounded inside edge to that so that we can get a good epoxy coverage around there without breaking through the corner. Same with the top side of the bulkhead as well. So that's roughly where we want to be with our first frame. That process is going to pretty much follow on for every other frame. So same kind of thing, we want to be rounding the insides, neating everything up, and we'll get these little holes filled as well. So we'll do that on a few other frames, and then we'll look at a different component as well. Okay, so I've got a handful of parts prepped, kind of one of each really, so I can show you guys a bit of each type of thing. So we got frame one, and it's paired up bulkhead. So we looked at that, cleaned up all the inside. We've got the stem where we've just rounded off the inside edges of that and cleaned up the faces. We've got the transom, so we've got these little holes filled in now, and again cleaned up the inside, just denibbed all of these edges. Same thing with the stringers, got those looking nice, and the keel and one of the chines as well. So our primary focus for epoxy coating at the moment is going to be internal faces, so faces that are going to be viewed from inside the boat, any area of wood which is potentially going to be covered up as we do an assembly, and things that are going to be a struggle to reach. So on the transom, for example, we're going to do all of these internal faces. We're not going to do this external face for now because we've still got some proud sections of timber on these little cheeks here that we need to take down just to follow the curvature, and we've generally got to do a bit of work on the curvature of this. We've still got to put these uprights in here which go onto the stringers, which we saw in the last video. And of course we're going to be shaping the outside as and when we put the topside battens in on the transom. So internal face on that for now. Much the same with the stringers, internal faces. So this is the edge that's going to be seen from inside of the boat, and we want to do both of the sides as well. We're going to leave the bottom for now because that's going to need to be beveled once it's on the boat, and we don't want to be coming too far up to that with the epoxy. So we will do that. Same with the keel as well. We're going to go internal face, and probably just part way up this edge. So we want to just really get most of this, you know, we want to be sealing the keel anywhere that it's going to run through the transition of a frame, so we're not potentially going to be able to seal that too well afterwards. And the same with the chine, we're going to do the internal face and we'll leave the external one for now because we'll coat that further down the line. So that is all of our bits. One thing to bear in mind with epoxy coating, as I said at the start of the video, we're looking to create a barrier that is going to keep moisture out of the timber and stop those fluctuations. Now on the same vein, what we also don't want to be doing is trapping moisture inside the timber, because it's going to do that just as well as it's going to keep it out. So it's quite critical for us to make sure that the timber is in a correct state before we completely encapsulate it. Now with these parts we're doing the first stage of encapsulation, so there are still going to be exposed edges on these parts, but we still really want to make sure that they are suitable to do that with. We don't want to risk trapping moisture in the timber at this time. Now I'm using all kiln dried timber for this boat, and it's obviously kept in my workshop. It's a nice dry, well regulated environment, which means that generally the moisture content of this this timber is going to be around about right. But just to be sure, we're going to check it with a moisture meter. So I'd strongly advise, if you're building boats and you're doing things like this, encapsulating things with epoxy, get yourself a little moisture meter. They don't have to be very expensive, and they're really good just to check the timber to see what's going on with it. So we want to be working with dry timbers. We don't want to be trapping an excess amount of moisture within that. So what we're aiming for really is around about a moisture content of 12% or less. We don't really want to be any more than that. And typically kiln dried timber will be specified at around 10 to 12%. That's a usual figure that most timber yards will aim for with kiln dry timber. So a moisture meter typically has a couple of probes on the top, and what we do is we just stick them into the wood and it will give us a readout for the moisture content level within that wood. So let's try it. Okay, so we'll try that with our keel timber. We're just going to push that into the surface. And you can see we've got about 12% moisture content there. We'll try it with our stringer. You can see that's reading 10.6. And our frame as well. And that's right down at 8.4. So as I say, I'm using kiln dried timber for this, and generally that's going to come in through the door pretty well seasoned anyway, so we're normally going to be pretty good, but it's just worth a check before you begin the epoxy coating process. So we're ready to go. Let's get some epoxy mixed up. Okay, so I'm going to start out with the transom, just using a small brush. Definitely recommend a brush for the initial application, just so you can really work it into that surface. So I'm using the West System 207 special clear coating hardener for this. That really is the product that you want to be using for this job. You could use the standard West System epoxy for this with the slow or the fast hardener. Because all of this is going to be internal within the boat, it doesn't actually need a great deal of UV resistance, because most of this that we're doing here is not going to be directly exposed to sunlight. But the special clear hardener does actually contain UV inhibitors, so it's going to give you a little bit of extra protection in the instance when some of this might be exposed, which certainly isn't going to do any harm. The other benefit to using this version of the epoxy is that it doesn't blush, so you don't get the amine blush that comes out when you use the standard epoxy and then leaves that waxy film on the surface. So that's going to be a little bit problematic trying to clean that up in all of these kind of fiddly areas. So I'd recommend using the 207. It's just going to make your life a lot easier for this process. It's designed specifically for coating wood, so it is really the way to go in my opinion. So we're looking for a good thorough coating over all of these internal faces. As I said, we're going to leave the outside edges at the moment because they're still going to be worked, and we're also going to leave this outer face because that is going to be worked upon and then coated a little bit further down the line. Okay, so there's a look at frame 1. So you can see again all internal faces. Haven't focused too much on the outside because we're going to be reworking those, but I've even done the inside face, so where this is going to mate up to the bulkhead when we glue it up. It doesn't hurt to get this completely sealed now, and then when we glue the two together with a thickened epoxy, we know that we're not going to have a dry joint there. So that's a really good measure to go to. Right up inside the gussets, inside the stem beveled joint, which we've already done, and just leaving the chine joints that we've still got some work to do on, and the outside of the frame and the top. Okay, so that's a typical frame. There's a typical bulkhead, so I've literally done every single face on that, anything that's exposed. Even if we're going to be slightly reworking these chine landings, that's not going to hurt at all. So you guys know what plywood's like. You want to make sure it's really well sealed because the edges of it are just like little straws that are going to wick up water, so we want to make sure that's really well covered all faces. So that's what we have for our stem. Just left that forward face because we're going to do quite a bit of work on this, beveling this in and cutting it to shape, so not worried too much about that. I will actually just do this run down here because where that lands on the keel, that is now correctly sized. Okay, so there we have all those parts coated. So you can see I've just focused on the internal areas. So underside of this keel isn't done. And yeah, internal parts of the chines and the stem and the stringers and the frames. So that gives you a little bit of a look at all the different parts basically and how it's going to be done. Okay, so this is one coat of epoxy on here. What we want to do here is to do 3 coats on everything, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, the first coat is going to start to absorb in a fair amount, particularly in plywood, which is quite an absorbent timber in comparison to solid wood. Secondly, for coverage, we want to make sure that we've definitely covered every face completely. So if you've missed tiny little bits on one coat, you'll catch them on the next coat. The chance of you completely missing something for 3 consecutive coats in a row, hopefully is quite slim if you're pretty thorough with the way you're working. So we want to make sure that we get complete coverage. We want to make sure that the epoxy has got a nice film thickness on top of the timber and isn't absorbed into to give us a dry surface. So we want to be doing 3 coats. We'll do that wet on wet, so we'll let this coat set up until it's sellotape tacky, and we're not going to disturb it when we apply the second coat. Then we'll put the second coat straight on top of that. Same again with the third coat, so we'll do 3 in a row, all in the same day within a window so that it's not fully cured, so we get a good chemical bond between all 3 coats. Now there could be some debate over when to do this process exactly, and some of you might be thinking, why can't I just paint the inside of the boat with epoxy once it's all put together? You can certainly do that. It's going to be a pretty horrible job to do at that stage. You're either going to have to do that when the boat is upside down and still on the strong back, so you're going to be working around all the strong back legs. You're not going to be able to seal the frames. You certainly don't want to be gluing the strong back legs to the frames. The other thing is, if you waited until the boat was turned over and you do it the right way up, you're going to be working downwards onto the epoxy, which is fine for the first coat, but when it comes to the second coat and you're at the sellotape tacky stage, you're going to be crawling around in a boat that is sellotape tacky with epoxy, trying to do the second and third coats. It's going to be a complete mess. You really don't want to be doing that. So I think this is the best time to do this process now, whilst we've got all of the parts out on the bench. We can get really good access to them. We can make sure we get in all those little edges and seal everything properly. And what we'll also do is we'll do this on the bottom planking and the side planking. So before we put those first layer of planks on, we'll seal those with epoxy. And what that's going to mean is that when we turn the boat over and we come to do the inside, it's already completely finished in there. So it's going to be a real nice thing to turn it over and see. It's going to all be ready to just press on with putting some top coat varnish on that and getting a really nice finish internally. Okay, so that is an overview of the epoxy coating process and how we're going to do things with Temptress. It's been quite a long video, a lot of chatting in it. I hope it's not got too boring, and hopefully everything that I've said in there has been informative and actually helpful with giving some reasoning behind why we actually do this, particularly within this boat design. So as I say, I'm putting some stuff together for a video that is dedicated to epoxy coating wood, and it's going to have some kind of animation stuff that's going to show us what's actually going on with the surface with epoxy, why this process works so well, and hopefully try and give some insight into whether or not it might be suitable for your particular application, if you're doing a different type of boat, or even if you're doing something that's nothing to do with boats, just you might need to epoxy encapsulate a piece of wood for a different reason. So that video is coming up further down the line. We'll keep an eye on the channel. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure you subscribe, and you'll get to see that one when it comes out. Just want to mention again, on a kind of broader note, for Dan Lee Boat Building, there's a couple of things that I've got in the pipeline, and we're really working towards trying to be able to get a full-size Temptress build underway. And there's a few things that I'll roll out over the coming weeks, months, and stuff that we're going to try and help to make that happen. The first of those is my Patreon, which I've set up, and I've already got some people on board with that. So thank you very much, guys, for your support. I really appreciate that. So if you haven't already taken a look, check that out. There's some extra benefits in there, such as discounts off of all my website stuff, so kind of boat plans and courses and things. There's some extra content, so you'll get early video releases. So when these kind of YouTube videos are ready, they'll go out on there ahead of time, so you get to watch them before they're properly released on YouTube. There's also a weekly video that kind of shows you behind the scenes stuff, so all the stuff that I'm doing here in the workshop that doesn't make it into YouTube. There's lots of other bits going on, so I'll kind of do a weekly video update on that. And there's some exclusive merchandise, so you can get various different things depending on which tier you decide to sign up to. So if you're interested, take a look at that. If not, just carry on watching my stuff on YouTube, and that will support me in its own little way. So hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers, guys.